Thank you. I want to change this camera set. What do I shake? Is that right? Shake. I don't remember shake. I need to pass someone. So, and I need to pass someone because it's too big. Big now. These are and now those plans. Yes. No, it's always, I've never experienced it before. It's always I know she's very kindly. You better know your things. This is now. This is the okay. This is finance. Four. It's upstairs. So my job is yesterday when I was February to 45. I already have it. After breakfast, say lunch. Definitely lunch, man. Did you know? So I don't know how to tell you because it's not reported to what earlier than this one. So, but the lunch breakfast time is very certain that lunch will definitely be late. That's breakfast. Yeah, this is breakfast. Breakfast. They take fair the but to be able to breakfast to do lunch. Lunch, so lunch by the dinner. Yes. Six days. Yeah, 6 days.
Hi, Rosita, can you hear us? Rosita? Hello?
Yeah, Osita is here.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Prof.
Good to see you, yeah. How's it going?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah. Oluchi, how are you today? Hello, Oluchi. Abigail, good afternoon.
This Abigail.
Yeah, I can see Oluchi as well.
Yeah, good
Abigail,
afternoon.
good afternoon. How are you today?
I'm fine. Good afternoon.
Yeah. Oluchi, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Good afternoon.
Okay, good to see you. I think we can start now. We have every panelist here. Yeah. Okay, you're welcome. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you. Okay, I welcome you all to the fourth session.
Yes.
So I welcome you to the fourth session of the panel on criminal children, representations of children without child. It's been a very wonderful time since yesterday. Where we have these papers, and I'm happy to note that panelists for today are also here. Panelists don't. And then we have one here. So yeah, so without wasting further time, we just dive into the presentation. I mean, as I have done in the previous three sessions, I want to highlight that certain key questions are we are examining on this panel. And those are the questions around the concept of childhood, the concept of children without childhood, the concept of agency, the notion of the causative agent that necessitates the loss of childhood. In other words, what can trigger the loss of childhood? And we're interested in knowing what kind of role, do children without childhood undertake, and a number of other things. So today it's my honor to introduce to you our panelists. We have here, and that will be our first presenter today, Oluchi Gili, followed by Osita, and then Oyekachi, yeah, comes up, and finally we would have Abigail. So here is some important information to keep in mind. Each presenter would have 15 minutes. If you can wrap up in 13, that would be great. But maximum 15, and I will be quite strict about that. So I want to join you to keep the time. Each presenter is required to introduce themselves. Tell us your name, your institution, your teaching and research interests, and then your university. By the way, I am the chair of the panel, and my name is Ademola Adeshola. So I teach at Mount Royal University in Canada, and my teaching and research interests are post-colonial literatures, African and Black diaspora literatures, and of course, child soldier narratives. I have introduced myself this way in the last 2 days, over the last 3 sessions. I haven't mentioned that later this fall, as between September, December, I'm going to have a book, published on, representations of African child soldier, narratives. So by next year, LSE, it's going to be one of the books we're discussing here. So I just want to highlight it. So after each presenter, oh, I didn't know that was coming. Thank you. So after each presenter is done, in the order outlined, we would then open things up to the audience. So on that note, I would think that our first presenter, Oluchi, are you? Oh, Oluchi is there. I'm sorry. so yeah, Oluchi, take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I hope, yeah, good afternoon. I just want to be sure you can hear me.
Yeah, clearly.
Okay. My name is Oluchi Igili, Dr. Oluchi Igili. I am right now a visiting fellow at University of Amsterdam, which is where I'm right now in Amsterdam. But back in Nigeria, I'm a member of staff in Adekunle Ajashi University, Performing Arts Department. And my research interest is legislative theater, political theater, and all forms of applied theater and theater for development. I mean, among other things. But today we are talking about what has to do with the children and childhood. And so the title of my paper, which I'll be presenting, and please, I'm very sorry, I don't have a PowerPoint prepared, so I'm just going to speak to the paper. Please, I crave your indulgence.
Yeah.
Okay. So the title of my paper is Karena's Quest for Self-Actualization, Interrogating Liminality and the Truncation of Childhood in Ben Binabe's Karena's Cross. And so we'll be asking a number of questions in this presentation, part of which will be what it means to be a child without childhood or without being afforded the domestic space, time and agency to be a child. How does Karena steer the course through the liminality of her precarious childhood in the quest for self-actualization? It is from these are some of the angles from which I'll be discussing the paper today. So I'd like to say talk about liminality, which is taken from the theory of rites of passage, and is the concept, is from the concept of the rite of passage that we have the concept of liminality, which means that persons pass from one identity state to another identity state. In other words, you transit from one identity state to another identity state. And this includes the passage sometimes from boy to man, from girl to bride, and all of that. But then I want to make a distinction from rite of passage as an event and rite of passage as a process. Because rite of passage can be an event in which a child is said to, after some ceremony, is said to pass from one level, maybe from a boy to a man or from a girl to a bride or whatever it is. But then it can also be a process. And actually, I'm looking at it more as a process in this presentation. And so in the first process, we talk about separation that is characterized by symbols of detachment. This also to some extent also applies to rite of passage as an event. And then we talk about the liminality, in which the ritual subject or the limina is ambiguous and passes through a realm that has few or none of the attributes of the before or after states. And then, of course, the final stage, which is the aggression or the consummation of the passage, where the limina reaches a new identity position and are therefore expected to adapt certain norms. This is a process and is different from the rite of passage, like I said before, which is conducted as an event. And so, having that in mind, we have to look at the concept of a child. Who is a child? This is a question that can be approached from a number of angles. For instance, we can look at it from the biological angle, in which a child is that person that's, one has all the alcohol and then has a lifespan and all of that. So that could be from an angle of looking at who a child is. Again, a child can also be looked at from the sociological angle, which means that a child can be a member of a family, a member of maybe a work group, or even just a member of the community, whatever it is. So those are some of the ways that one can look at the concept of who a child is. But again, when we are talking about the range of maybe ages that's considered to be a child, there seems to be a lot of arguments about how to categorize that. So I'm not going far into that one. But of course, to then say that even when it comes to the concept of childhood, not just about being a child, but the concept of childhood, again, there are so many views about what childhood means. And so for this presentation, I'll be drawing a lot from Manfred Liebel, who also situates this concept of children without childhood, and argues that largely there is a Eurocentric view that is being used to categorize what childhood is or what childhood should be in the global South. Whereas to him, he sees that growing up as a child in the global North is quite different from growing up as a child in the global South. But that UNICEF, for instance, and other bodies, other international bodies, seem to use that singular understanding from the global South to now draw conclusions about what childhood should be, even in the global South. And he kind of he's against that. And so, talking about the global South, Liebel goes on to give us some ideas about what it means to be a child. For instance, he talks about work or labor, if you like, talking about child labor, and that's in his own conception, child labor in this case is not the kind of destructive child labor that we have that can, that's what we want to call child labor. Sorry, how am I doing on time? Can you give me an idea?
Yeah,
I can see you looking at.
Yeah, probably. I still go with time, some 7 minutes more.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. So, he talks about that children within the global South, children, yes, they work in the families. They are made to be part of the communities, and in the process, they see work not as a punishment, not as a burden, so to speak, but as something that is required of them as members of a community. And so that is different from the kind of situation we have in the global South, in the global North, rather. And so Liebel is not happy with the situation where the standard in the global North is used as a paradigm in the global South also. Now, that takes me to the concept also of shared responsibility in the global South. Liebel is also making the argument that childhood and being an adult in the global South is like a shared responsibility, that adults know what they are supposed to do, children also know what they are supposed to do. And so it is not really labor as such in that. Of course, I know that there are so many other ways the concept of child labor can be looked at from, and I'm not going into that. I understand that quite correctly. But then I'm just taking this aspect of his argument. And so looking at that, I now go into the text itself, which is Karena's Cross, in which Karena, a young girl of 13, the father summons her one day and says, look, get yourself ready for marriage. Incidentally, Karena wants to go to school. She wants to be educated. She wants to acquire education, but the father says no. And so when the father realizes that Karena is not willing to do what he wants her to do, he kind of changes the approach and says, okay, you want to go to school, no problem, get yourself ready, you're going to go back to school. And so she relaxes, thinking that that was it. But unfortunately, the day the father promised her that she was going to return to school, the father had made an arrangement for her for her to be circumcised, to go through female circumcision. And according to the father, this circumcision process was I would like to quote directly from the text here, to deactivate the sexual urge in you and prevent you from promiscuity so that you remain peaceful within yourself. And so female circumcision here is brought in, ironically, ignoring the pain, the trauma involved in it. Ironically, it is seen as something that will be of help to the young girl, something that will help her to remain peaceful within herself. Whereas indeed, she goes through a very cruel process of being circumcised at that age, and even as a female, not only at her age, but also as a female. And so after, by the time she's healing from that process, the father goes on to marry her off to his friend, his own friend. And during the ceremonies, Karina manages to escape. And this was her second attempt at escape. She had made the first attempt, which was unsuccessful. But this time she manages to escape successfully from the father. Unfortunately, she runs into a band where she is kidnapped, raped, and married off to somebody else, to a leader of the gang. And so, so that I don't take too much of the time, in the process,
you have 2 minutes.
Okay. All right. So let me, since I have just 2 minutes, let me go to the conclusion because I don't want to overshoot my time. So in the end, Karina is able to go through all the hurdles that she had to pass through. I can't give all of them because of time. She started going through all the hurdles. Eventually, she gets into the hands of somebody who makes her finally to be able to achieve her dream of being educated. And not only that, she gets married to the person. And so, if you look at it, you then see that Karina's, like I say in my conclusion, that although Karina's second phase of rite of passage is truncated by culture as championed by her father, in the course of time, Karina is eventually a nation of passage. The second one, the second conclusion, Karina's experience does not fit in completely into Libel's argument. Neither does it entirely represent the Eurocentric views of childhood. And then finally, rather, it shows a child who, despite the truncation of her childhood, manages to arrive at the other side of the spectrum as a fulfilled adult. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Yeah, thank you. Most of your points bring to the fore again some of the particular points we have been wrestling with over the last 2 days. And it's good to also get this perspective that FGC can also extinguish the fire of childhood as it is early marriage. So we will come more to all of that later. So we can go to our second presenter now. Yeah. Sita. Osita, can you go on, please? Osita?
Yes.
Yeah, please go on.
All right. Can you hear me?
Very clearly.
All right. Okay. My name is Osita Nicholas, Dr. Osita Nicholas from Federal University, Duse, Jigawa State, Nigeria. So my research area is in African literature, Francophone African literature, with focus on post-Rwandan genocide testimonial novels. So I work more on novels written on the Rwandan genocide, that is trauma novels. So I've done some work on children and the Rwandan genocide. But when I saw this panel, I decided to do something on children, instead of children as seen in some post-Rwandan genocide literature. So I'll be talking about what I have observed in my current location in northern Nigeria. So I'll share my screen. I have some slides that I'll be sharing. So my presentation is titled The Almajiri School System in Northern Nigeria Between Education and Lost Childhood. Please, I will say that my network is bad. I am having a very bad network. It's raining, very bad network here. So this is the title, and it if you look at it, I've done some image I picked last week from while I was trying to write. It's part of the title. The image is there as part of my title. So this is my name. This is the outline of what I'll be talking about. What I'll be doing introduction and brief historical perspective if there is time. Then the systematic deterioration of the Almajiri schools. Then the abuse of the Almajiri school system, Almajiri children as men without childhood. Then a call for gradual reforms. And then I'll do my conclusion. So I will just run because I'm not in history. One of the most organized schools in northern Nigeria today that has endured is the Almajiri school system, where young people are brought together to learn. If you don't call them Almajiri schools, you can call them traditional Quranic schools. So they are still here. They have endured. They have been over many centuries, and despite modernity, the schools have remained. So there is practically no state in northern Nigeria, I'm talking of the far north, that you will not find the Almajiri schools and the Almajiri schools pupils. So I've done some introduction that I'll just move on. So over the years, the economy of the country that has continued to go down, where we say affected the operations of the Almajiri system, because in the olden days, the pupils were taken care of. The teachers were also taken care of. So the children don't have to beg. But with time, the system is almost associated with child begging, child poverty, and everything. So you see children that are left on their own. So I did some write-up here that you will see. Then there is abuse of the system. I try to identify why there are abuses, and then who are those receiving the consequences of the abuse. So I want you, or you will observe here that nobody is talking about is that parents are responsible for the production of the children. So a lot of impoverished families up here have uncountable number of children. So children are produced, they are produced. So I think that if the system is going to stop, it has to begin with parents. Then there are some traditional beliefs that are used to justify the Almajiri system of schools. One of the beliefs is that children must suffer to be successful in life. That is, for you to succeed, to be a responsible person in the future, you must suffer as a kid. So I also found out that the system is used as cheap labor, because the children don't go to school. So you find them working in farms, working in households as cleaners, as dishwashers, as people who draw water for families, and doing practically all forms of work for families, and they don't get paid. They are always giving food because they are not with their parents. The boys are not with their parents. So we look at the state of the learning environment, the deplorable state of the learning environment, and then the living environment. There are no classrooms. They can stay under trees, uncompleted buildings, and learn. So we see that. Then I have instructors where instructors use the kids, employ, to engage in some work. Then they make money for the instructors. Then failure of government. Government across the north, they seem to have given up on the system. So I have a picture. I took this picture last week. This is the boys, as you can see, in my neighborhood. As I was leaving, I saw this and I took the picture. I don't know if you can see that. I have also another picture here of the boys. They are supposed to be during school hours. You find them. So then the boys, I said here that they are men, because from the early childhood, they have lost their childhood. So they are adults. They live on their own. They take care of their health, their food. There is no parental care, no grooming whatsoever. So they are often seen as homeless. They are seen as homeless children. Then with difficult childhood, and they are vulnerable, and child poverty, I talked about that. Then I also did something on their health. I've never seen them visit hospitals when they fall ill. They recover or they die. And that's why I said, it's about survival of the fittest. Then poor nutrition, they feed begging and then rummaging on waste bins and anything they can find, they feed on it. And then we have poor grooming and deprivation. Often they are prone to vice because they don't have any guidance, no parents. So you find them engaged in a vice. I have another picture here, if you can see that. I took these pictures just in the last couple of days. Okay. So I then go on to talk about the gradual reforms. I think we must all agree that this system leads to lost childhood and children without childhood in the North. They exist and they seem, the government seems to have given up on them, despite that there are a lot of researches, that have been done, but implementation seems to be what is lacking. So I think that there should be gradual. I'm not saying because of the enormous task. I'm suggesting, from my finding, I suggest we have a model state or local government where a pilot reform are put in place. Not all the schools. We can take one school or two states in the North and see if there are ways of reforming in those two states. But as I said, parents are contributors to this practice. So I wrote some things on that. Then some pictures also. This is, I don't know about time. You hear me?
Yeah, you just have 1 minute. I thought you were wrapping up.
All right, so I'll just summarize. Okay, so for my conclusion, I said, no doubt that the Almajiri education has endured in northern Nigeria. If you come here, this is what is seen across states, towns, and villages. Every town, you must find these schools. So they are there, they are organized, but they are not what is supposed to be in the year 2024. So I think that children should not be abandoned. But in conclusion, I wish to say that parents are responsible more because they are the people who produce these children and then send them to these schools as a way of, avoiding their responsibilities of raising the children. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Osita, for sharing with us the ongoing research. We will come to that during the time when we engage your presentation. I just think one of the things that you've stressed here, and this has come up in the last 3 panels, sessions of this panel, is the fact that schooling system can also precipitate, the loss of childhood. And paradoxically, that's, what we're getting. But again, one of the things I wanted to keep in mind, and we can talk about that when we get to that point, is to make that point very clear. The sense in which Almajiri children, transmogrify into men, as you're saying. it didn't come out quite clearly how that transition happened or the sense in which you're conceiving of them as adults, arising from their involvement, in that schooling system. So it will be interesting to understand how that transition, happens. I'm sure you pressed for time, but we can talk about it. So thank you very much once again. We will then move to the third presenter, who is here by my side, and that's Onyekachi. Onyekachi? Okay.
Good day. My name is Onyekachi Obai from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. I'm a graduate of English and Literary Studies. And my research interests are decoloniality, border studies, and critical disability studies. These are the areas where I do research. And then the focus of my discourse this afternoon will be on the call to care. The call to care, reincarnation and messianic mantle in Imbolo How Beautiful We Are. So the major motive behind this discourse is I'm trying to respond to a particular question that was provoked in the call. And that was the question of which kinds of society can we find children without childhood? Kinds of society where we can find them. And then in the course of the conversation, a bit have been spoken about that. And then it was established that children without childhood are found in marginal communities that are suffering from oppressions of different sort. So what I did here is that I'm bringing in mythology, to use mythology as a lens of seeing how mythology can actually condition children to lose their childhood. And one thing with mythologies is that mythologies come from specific societies. So it is the mythologies of these societies that engender the ideology that sustains them to see children not actually as children. Now, what do I mean? I'm looking at the reincarnation myth, the myth of reincarnation that believes that a child can be born, and then that child is actually someone who died before coming back a second time. Now, this is a mythology that is specific to different societies. But I'm looking at the response to this mythology from certain African societies. And my data for analysis is actually a literary text. I'm using Imbolo How Beautiful We Are. Now, in that particular text, we are exposed to Kosawa, a community that is being plundered by the perils of resource extraction. Pexton, an oil company, comes into this community, and then the cost of drilling petrol, in fact, the community is almost at the verge of extinction. So the community, they are looking for sources of survival in the midst of this pain. Now, because of this, the community begins to act in a way that is not normal. But if you look at it close, you will discover that the reason, the motive behind that action is that they are looking for means of survival. Now, the theoretical lenses that I'm using to look at this particular text and issue is border studies. Now, border studies is a literary theory that originated from the field of geography. Now, the traditional idea of border is that border refers to geographical boundaries that have to do with nations, continents, communities. But in critical border studies, we are now rethinking the original notion of border to begin to see border beyond physical boundaries. So we're now seeing borders as markers of difference, not necessarily physical boundaries. So that a thing as when someone is 20 years old and when someone is 30 years old, that can be a border. A border can function as leaving Lagos here and then traveling to Enugu. That can be a border. You are crossing the border between Lagos to enter Enugu. That can be a border as well. A border can as well function as moving from what you know to what you don't know. So these are borders. So I'm following Johann Szymanski's 5 planes of border. In discussing border, Johann Szymanski theorized major 5 planes of borders. So he called one the epistemological border, he called one the topographical border, he called one the symbolic border, he called one the textual border. So these are different strands. I mentioned 5, 4 topographical, symbolic, epistemological, and then textual borders as well. So these are different borders that you find while reading a literary text. Now, the topographical border refers to the border that has to do with moving from one space to another space. So that if I'm to move from this space to this space, I'm crossing a topography. It has to do with topography. Now, beyond topography, you meet the epistemological border. The epistemological border is moving from the known to the unknown. The textual border deals with moving from the pages of a text to another page, from chapters to another chapter. Now, the symbolic border is metaphorical in context, in the sense that they refer to binaries like the rich, the poor, the fair, the dark. So it is metaphorical in context. So it deals with binaries majorly. So these are the borders you find within the confines of critical border studies. So I'm not looking at this particular text from the lenses of these borders, so that I'm now beginning to see mythology as an orientation that these societies embody. So they see children without childhood, in the sense that when a child is coming back, when someone is giving birth to, and then the person dies and then comes back a second time, that return is seen from the lenses of critical border studies as I forgot to mention temporal border crossing. Temporal border crossing is one that has to do with crossing between time, so you can move from a specific age to the next age. That is temporal border crossing. So that death itself is seen as a border crossing, but it's seen as temporal border crossing, so that this person is moving from life to death. Now, in the thinking of reincarnation, when someone dies and then moves from life to death, that person has crossed a temporal border. And then in African literature, we are meant to understand that there are 3 major worlds: the world of the living, the world of the dead, and then the world of the unborn. So that a child who dies and then leaves, someone who dies and then leaves the world of the living and then enters into the world of the dead, the person has crossed a temporal border. Crossing that temporal border, the individuals in this society are no longer seeing that child when that child actually returns, because the text I'm looking at, we have 2 major characters. They were twins. And then in the struggle to liberate this community from the perils of resource extraction, they engage in helping this community in preparing charms and then all those stuff. So, but at the end of the day, they were killed. So they died. And then after their death, a woman gave birth to another set of twins again. These twins came with the same mark of these late spiritists. So the community now began to see the children not necessarily as children. They are seeing them as a continuation of those spiritists that just died. So I'm coming back. So they are seeing the children, although they are children, but because of their belief in reincarnation, they begin to see the children as adults, though children by physical presence, though children by age. But because of certain ideologies, which is the issue of reincarnation, they are now interpreting their death as a temporal border crossing. That they just crossed and they now came back. So are you now seeing the temporal border crossing that is happening in text? So in this instance now, this kind of society is where we find children without childhood. Societies that uphold the myth of reincarnation. So that one of the findings I got across in this research is that marginalized communities exploit their mythologies in trying to liberate themselves from oppression. these marginalized communities are working towards an alternative future that is free of different forms of oppression. And in doing this, the only thing that they could lay their hand on is on their mythology. How can we use our mythology to move from where we are to where we want to be? So that in thinking about the societies that produce children without childhood, let's pay attention to marginalized communities and then their mythologies that as well propel this kind of situation. So that's one of the discoveries I made in this research. And then now bringing in reincarnation in the imagination of critical border studies, that at the end of the day, I discovered that in critical border studies, reincarnation is simply seen as temporal border crossing. You just crossed from life to death. And if you are crossing from death back to life, these are just temporal border crossing, such that death itself ceases to be an end. That in the continuation of that former life, that individual does not sustain an original identity. The identity of that individual is the identity of the person that they are incarnate of. So that is the major focus of this research. Now, one other final discovery I made as well during my study is that the boundaries between what you know and what you don't know can inform whether you are a child or whether you are not a child. Now, in looking at this text, this child spiritus, as the former twins die, the two children that were given birth to, Cotonou and Bamako, they began to enter into things that takes away the innocence of a child. As a result of that belief that these children are bearing the messianic mantle to liberate this community from oppression, they began to delve into practices that are occultic, practices that are so spiritual and mystical, so to say. So because of this involvement in some of these practices, they begin to lose that their childhood innocence. So that at the end of the day, we are concluding that in Johann Szymanski's 5 planes of border, that what takes away the childhood of a child from the perspective of reincarnation within the context of border studies is when a particular child crosses the temporal border and when that child crosses the epistemological border. The child crosses the temporal border, dying and coming back to life again to continue the life of the person that lived before. And then the epistemological border is moving from the things that they know as children, so to say, innocence, from the things that they don't know, things that there are some knowledge that is not meant for a child. So for instance, in this text, I began to see that at some point, there are some certain ritual practices that these children were required to do, which involves them even seeing a lady unclad. So imagine a child engaging in that kind of activity. So that activity is a movement from the known to the unknown. So the crossing of the epistemological border and the crossing of the topographical border produces a child who is without childhood. And this crossing is engineered by the mythology of reincarnation.
Well, thank you very much. What you just did now is condensed milk. It's a lot of, tins of milk that we can get from it. Thank you. I got blown away by, again, the way you're articulating this point, because for me, I haven't listened to quite a number of papers on this subject. This begins to seem to me as some very powerful summaries, with depth. In that sense, we will come to that. And then I took away quite a lot of things. Again, your presentation helps us to understand that, as it is any other categories, the human category or the demography referred to as children without childhood itself could be a social construct, in that sense. So that's and again, exposure or lack of it to information could also determine, who do we classify as a child? Who do we classify, as not a child? And to further that is the question, the point about sudden exposure to some kinds of information could, of course, trigger the loss of childhood in that sense. I'll make one point and then I'll yield the floor to the last presenter. And this may not be exactly, the point you're making, but it just helps me to think about it in that way. When you talk about myths, as a means of also, determining the notion of children without childhood, I could argue that given the very, troubling and horrendous economic situation of Nigeria, there are kids who are born, who are right from their mother's womb, they've been deprived of childhood. For example, hunger. The mother who hasn't fed very well while pregnant couldn't have, enriched the child in the sense in which they need to feed. So when that child is born, they're born from a place of hunger. They start knowing hunger even before they start, embracing the physical world, or living in a habit in the physical world. I mean, so I'll leave things there. Okay. I mean, there's a lot to, come to in that regard. Thank you once again. And so we will go to our final. Abigail, are you still there with us? You are muted. Please unmute yourself. Okay.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very clearly. Please go on.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Abigail Oakena from Nnamdi Azikiwe University, from the Department of English Language and Literature. I did my PhD on Boko Haram insurgency and Niger Delta militancy. So in the course of my research, I was actually looking at the cause, how come about the insurgents. I discovered that a Manjiri system is actually one of the factors. So when I saw the call for paper for this conference, I was like, wow, I can say something on this. So I discovered that the children or children without childhood is actually one of the major issues affecting us in Nigeria through this Manjiri system of education. So I'll be speaking from the literary perspective as I've chosen my text, which is Nathan Jones, Born on a Tuesday. Before we start, let's look at who is a child. From the UNESCO definition of a child, they said someone below the age of 18. And the dictionary said a minor who is under parental protection and providence. So it means that when a child lacks these basic expectations, the child is now somehow an adult. When you are no longer under your parents, or when you are not being fed for, you are feeding for yourself, you are taking care of yourself, and you're being responsible for all your actions, no direction, no guidance, it means that you are an adult. So in this research also, we'll be adopting the new historicism theory. This new historicism theory helps the literary text as a fictional work to interact with history, looking at the facts and figures in the society. Truly, do we see this in the North? Yes, like the last presenter said, the Amanjiri children or the Amanjiri system of education in the North is actually exposing these children to what they're not supposed to be exposed to. My research focus is on the cause of insurgency through the Amanjiri system of education. That's my research focus. The cause of restiveness in Nigeria insecurity, a lot of it is coming from this kind of education because the writer focuses his attention on that part. So in the text, we see that children are being taken away from their parents, okay? In the name of a child traveling from Kano, or rather from Sokoto to Kano to Kaduna, to come and stay under the tutelage of a sheikh or shehu or malam, as the case may be, without not really checking the orientation of this supposed religious leader, the orientation, his religious orientation. And you know, by so doing, this child, like in the text, the children that we are taking to this man were between the age of like 6 to 7, and they spent like 3 years under this man. And this particular religious leader is going to inculcate whatsoever doctrine he's practicing into these children. So according to the text, we see that a particular character called Dantala, he finished his study. He could not go back to Sokoto because of the money was not there. And their leader could not assist. Instead, these children, they will leave this man and enter the street. Yes, in the text, usually gather under one tree called the coca tree, where they smoke. Imagine children between the age of 9 to 15 smoking wee-wee, according to the protagonist, where they smoke. And in doing that, the politicians will see them and then come and start brainwashing them that there is a political party they should support, the one for the infidels and the one for the faithful Muslims. So in this text, I would say that Enata John depicts the political system in Nigeria in 2015, the election that happened between President Goodluck Jonathan and President Muhammadu Buhari. How religion played a significant role in that election, and through this Amajiri system. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So now these children they are now like tools in the hands of these political dictators. They use them to achieve their goals. They use them to achieve their aims at the detriment of the society, and even destroying these children because there's no parental protection, no parental guidance. So in the text, Dantala, let me quote him, what he said here. He said, the boys like to boast of the people they killed, and the leader of the gang does not like to talk about it. He just sits there and smoke wee-wee while they talk over each other's head. According to Liama, he said many Amanjiri, often of the rural origin, were and are living in destitute circumstances and are therefore considered as easy prey for radical groups. It is among them that most members of the Kuka Tree Boys, now referring to the text, born on a Tuesday, are recruited. Most of these boys are those who are forced by poverty to hang around after their Quranic training. So it shows that in Nigeria today, this issue of Boko Haram, Fulani herdsmen, killing, beheading here and there, majority of these people are actually from this extraction. They're from this extraction, this Amajiri extraction, when you look at it from the text, because my data is coming from a novel as a literary scholar. So if we move further in the text, we see that there's a particular sheikh, or rather a particular malam, whose opinion was not really in line with what they were teaching these people, but he could not really voice out. He saw that things were not the way they ought to have been, but he could not voice out, being that he was like a tree, just one person in the forest. Others are after, do the will of Allah, do the will of Allah. Then and I asked, what is the will of Allah? According to the protagonist, he asks, what is the will of Allah? In this text was not answered. But when you read Barbari's text on the paths who takes us, they said that the will of Allah is for you to be a soldier for Allah. And who are these people carrying out this will of Allah? They are the students. They are Majuris. They are the people that have been trained to carry out the will of Allah. So this has been a major issue, though we are shying away from it, But the literary text, the literary writers, they're actually attacking this issue because many texts, when you read from Born on a Tuesday to Bury Beneath the Barber Tree to this present one that was released last year, they're addressing this issue of Amajiri system being solely responsible for issue of restiveness, insecurity in the country because they're actually children without childhood. They are children that were exposed to things adults are into without any direction. But everyone is hiding under the guise of what? Religion, under the pretext of religion, fight for Allah, fight for this, fight for that. So in this research, we are trying to look at if there could be a kind of reformation of the Amajiri school in the North, the Amajiri School of Education. Because when it's totally reformed and teachers, their leaders are being, will I say, are being censored, what did they tell these children? What did they teach? I believe there will be a better Nigeria. The issue of insecurity, the issue of killings here and there, discrimination, all sorts will reduce drastically. And again, if they are being reformed and they are being taught practical education, I'm not trying to say we have to impose Western education on them, because even in their Islamic system of education, things, I believe the Quran is not just all about kill the infidel. The good part of it should be given to, exposed to these children, because majority of them in the text, they don't even know how to read, they can't read. So it's what they are being told that they go, it's just the order. This is what Allah said. This Allah could be just the mindset of a leader somewhere who is pretending to be Allah, and they'll say, do his will, that is the Allah's will. So you see, these children are highly being manipulated, and they grew up into adulthood with this kind of conception, with this kind of view. So in doing this, you see that the society will keep suffering and suffering and suffering without us not looking at the cause, the major problem of insecurity in Nigeria, which is this Amajiri system of education from the North. So they need to be reformed, and what they teach there needs to be investigated properly, and even their teachers need to pass through a kind of proper reformation so that the people they'll be breeding, that will be coming out from them, we have a better view of how to relate with humans, how to tolerate, how to embrace, how to welcome, how to show love. That's what this text is talking about. And I'll be concluding my presentation now on this, still arguing that Amajiri system in the North, according to Nathan John's Born on a Tuesday, one of the major causes of youth restiveness, insecurity, and insurgency in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abigail. That's quite some interesting point there. I mean, you sent out for us the fact that in the text you look at, there is a depiction of the Almajiri system as one of the causes of children without childhood. In other words, it's one of the places where we begin to see the emergence of children whose childhood has been, defaced, affected, erased and eroded in that sense. And your presentation also make the important point about politics, the nature of politics that is instituted within any space is also something to look at as something that can produce, the loss of childhood in that sense. And the final point I want to make, which you have very nicely articulated, is the fact that we're now seeing emerge literary texts, that are quite very meaningfully engaging with this phenomenon. And to that degree, we're seeing again that literature constitutes a space wherein ideas and insights can be drawn, for attending to societal problems, such as the increasing population of children without childhood. Thank you very much, for those quite meaningful points. And there are ways in which the four presentations intersect, and diverge, are very meaningful. Well, I'll stop here, and we have audience in the room, and I'm, sure they have questions and comment. And I saw very first, while the presentation was going on, our online audience raising their hand. So what I'm going to do, I am going to ask that we unmute Pelumi. I saw his hand first. We will take Pelumi, and then we come to you in the room, and then we go back online and take Adiza, and after we take you in the room. So, and then we can come to you as a fifth person. So in that order, we will put it. Pelumi, please, let's keep a comment or questions quite succinct so that we can leave here for lunch. Yeah, please, Pelumi.
Yeah, thank you, the moderator. I have a question for Abigail, who just finished our presentation. She made a lot of important remarks about the Almajiri school, the Almajiri children being out of, wandering on the street and things like that. Of course, they are children without childhood. I want to ask about professional children. Maybe if I should also say it, professionalization of children or commercialization of children. I will look at this within the context of African diaspora, the example of Michael Jackson, who as an adult complained that he was robbed of his childhood, that his childhood was used for professional performances as a musician. And as an adult, he began to desire things that belong to children. I'm looking at that with the example of Michael Jackson, but we also have a lot of examples like that in Nigeria. Benita Okoje, as a child, was a professional musician. Imedarolo, Medirolo Jesu, Obunease, Imedarolo, Obunease, Medirolo Jesu, Sebedeneme. That didn't disrupt the education of Benita Okoje. She attended Redeemers University, and she did well in life. I'm just asking generally, what is the impact of professionalization or commercialization in either robbing or enhancing the childhood of children?
Thank you, Pelumi. I would say that any of the panelists other than Abigail, you can take a start at that question. That's if you wish. Abigail, you first. Abigail, are you there? Okay, any other panelists?
Hello, I'm here.
Yeah. So please go on.
Sir, actually, my presentation, I'm not talking about professionalization of children, okay, for commerce. For me, I'm talking about indoctrinalization, to indoctrinate children for political purposes. They are two different things. Fine. When you indoctrinate a child for political things, this is what you will see. What we are seeing, you read the killing, the stuff, using our political talks in the non-stuffs like that, having big parties, small party, infidel, non-infidel parties, just like that. Now, in the aspect of commercialization or professionalization for commercial purposes, they suffer almost the same thing. But these people, being that they are on the side of commerce, they are being seen as celebrities. That's why once that celebrity status dropped, they will sink into depression. So they're always there because they cannot really react like these people on the extreme that are being used for political purposes. They are enjoying their clout. They're enjoying their, what would I call, the noise around them. But once you take that from them, that's another aspect that has to do with trauma. It has to do with psychological issues. Once you take that part from them, you see them, they start living on hard drugs just to feel hungry, just to feed themselves. That's another aspect of childhood, when children are being professionalized for the sake of commerce. It's a different thing entirely. But they all suffer the same fate. It's not for good. Allow children to be children. Let them enjoy their childhood in all. That's my own contribution.
Thank you. Anybody who wants to go again? Oluchi, please go on.
Okay. Yeah, taking it from the angle of the question Pelumi asked, I think it's quite clear that Abigail's presentation did not have to do with that, but then I think he just wants some kind of contribution along that line. And I want to say that, in fact, it's not even until their celebrity status is taken away from them that they begin to feel the pain of not having a childhood which they ought to have had. Even with their celebrity status, it gets to a point in life, in the life of those children, that, I mean, those adults now, that they realize that there's something in their growing up. There's something, there's a vacuum, there's a lacuna in their growing up, which their celebrity status did not allow them to enjoy what they should have, to be children when they ought to have been children. And so, however you look at it, whether it's for celebrity or commercial purposes, professionalization of those kids or their talents, or as Almajiri children, or whatever it is, anything that takes away the space for a child to be a child is ultimately destructive. It could come in any form, whatever form it takes. It's ultimately, that would be my take on it. It's ultimately destructive. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Oluchi, that's an important point. But you know what? Either about place, about people, or anything. My understanding, to borrow Adiche's famous line, is that there's no single story about any of this, right? So this, children, the categories of human robbed of adulthood. The point is to say, isn't there something positive that we can also highlight, from their being in that position, of their being robbed of child? Is it just these negatives? It's just all this destruction. Do you get my point?
Yeah, I do.
Right. So
I get your point, and I think
you are muted now.
Sorry. If I can attempt an answer to that, I think there could also be some positives, because I have seen, I think I watched a video some time ago, a clip some time ago of a child in the US, and he was at the age of about 7 or so, he was already seeing himself as a major. He was already assuming that status and everything of. So somehow, even though we say, well, it has taken away something from them, it also, in a way, perhaps prepares them for a life of adulthood in some ways. I don't know.
Yeah, of course. So we have Osita, do you have anything to say, or then we just go to the next person? We have
Go on.
Okay, please, your question.
My question is for the doctor, sir. Dr.
Osita,
yes. Due to your research about the Arimagiris in the north, so my question is that what do you think that the government would do to avert the menace that have befallen those Arimagiris? Is there any solution to the issue over there, sir? That's my question. To avert the
did you get a question?
Suffering that is
Yes.
Oh, yeah, please go
on.
All right, thank you. Question. If you are listening towards the end, when I made my conclusion, I did say that this menace, this phenomenon, is not something the government can stop alone. No government in Nigeria today can stop the Almajiri system. Many have tried it and it failed. The reason is that the thing has been there for a long time. Then you cannot stop street children without talking about parents that produce these children. So if we talk about government could be for 4 years they are gone, you know, or there is election and then change of government policies, this comes and go. So the first thing we must address is that the children are produced by some people who now cannot take care of it. It has become like a way of life that I have 15 children, I cannot cater for them. So what do? I push them to Kano or Sokoto for them to now fend for themselves. So you find children that are 6 years, 4 years, 7 years, they are already on their own. I showed you some pictures. Those kids you see there, their parents may be in like 200, 300 kilometers away. They are on their own. They fend for themselves. They take. So how can a government, I mean, the resources available here today cannot even end it. And how do you end it as a government when more children come up every day? I mean, every day, hundreds of children are produced. So I think that if we are going to lay the blame on the government alone, is wishful thinking. It's not going to work. It has to start from value reorientation, from where the kids come from. And let me tell you something. These kids are not from all the families. You notice that if we have anything called middle class today in Nigeria, they are not the children of the middle class. They are not the children of the elites. So they are produced by the poorest of the poor. Okay, no civil servants here we put their children in this system. No, it's from the poorest, from the interior villages that they come from. That's what I have noticed. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, quite very useful point there. I should just add also, hearing from you that cultural practices, you know, could also eventuate into the loss of childhood. You know, and I say that because in the north, and I was born in Maiduguri, so in Borno State. So I am quite familiar with the Almagiri system that you and Abigail, have so insightfully talked about. And you find out that it's cultural. I mean, for those who are involved to say, all right, this is actually what it meant to do was to say, go to this place, receive this kind of education, but without support, financial support and other material support. And so the Balam or whoever the teacher is needs, has limited resources themselves, and they have to ask the children to go and fend for themselves in that point. So if I have you correctly, Osita, part of what needs to be done is also to rethink. I mean, culture is not static as well. In certain respect, taking it's dynamic, it changes. I mean, and it must change with the time, in this sense. So in supporting government through parental, change, there's also the need to work on culture in that sense and not fool ourselves that it's been done since, it's been done like this since forever. We're going to keep it like that. No. Okay. Adiza, can you please ask the question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Hadiza Kiri Abdurrahman, and I actually did my research on the Almajiri system of Northern Nigeria. I've done extensive work on it. I love how you started with the danger of a single story, because my research actually pushes back on these dominant narratives. And I feel like the reason I felt the need to talk today was because I needed to speak for the Almajiri who cannot speak for themselves today. If I think they heard some of the things that were said, as much as it's well-meaning, it can be deeply concerning. I have a question for Osita and for Abigail as well. First of all, I know El Nathan. El Nathan is a dear friend. I've read the book as well. For Osita, I wonder who your participants were and what the focus of the research was. And for Abigail, I'm just wondering how much you can over-infer from a single text, and if any attempt was made to engage with alternative narratives of the system, because I think that is really crucial. My research actually disaggregates what I call this misrepresentational discourses of Almajiranchi. The child's right concern is really, truly valid. But if you read a lot of the research out there, especially Hannah Hockner, you'd find that there is little empirical evidence that connects Almajiri to Boko Haram. That is the stereotype, because obviously post 9/11, Islam is a radicalizing influence. I did hear a lot of things about Malamai and what they teach. So I'm just putting it out there. here that there are narratives about inter alia modernity, conceptions of childhood, questions of what knowledge is, and so many other issues of what we think schooling should be. I think what I am trying to say is I'd have loved to see more nuance and certainly more acknowledgement that there are other narratives concerning the system rather than leaving it out here that this is what it is. Especially with some of the images, if we live in the North, these are the things that we see all the time. But my research particularly looked at men. So the men they become. I moved on from childhood and then looked at the men that they become. And I think sometimes this nuance is really critical. I'm going to stop right here and thank you for your presentation, but I just wanted to put it out here that there are other narratives besides this. And yes, there's a lot of childhood, but that there are other narratives besides this as well. And there are change happening. I did hear you talk about reform. There's a lot of reform. So there's the SPIM project, there's the PLANE project currently, that there's reform happening. And but you need again to understand the system to see why reform has failed. Parents are not so much as sending their children to a school, they're sending their children to a Malam. It's Malam that is in local parentis. And it's not as thoughtless and as feckless as it has been made out to be. And I'm going to stop there, but I just felt the need to add my voice as an Almajiranchi scholar. Thank you.
Thank you for that intervention. So Osita and Abigail, I'll leave it to you now. Yeah, Osita, Abigail.
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry, although I didn't really get how because my network, I don't know.
So the question she puts to you has to do with how much can you make from just a single text as your presentation, focuses on.
Oh, okay. Actually, like I said, my data are the text. And again, when you read Aliyu Baba Ari's text, published last year, the title is The Paths That Take Us, is also supporting in a way what Nathan John had earlier stipulated in his text. This idea of children not be taken care of and stuff like that. However, I appreciate her contribution. And she said, now there are reforms and sort things like this. So when you read the text, as I said, my data is from there. You see that this issue of insurgency and insecurity actually emanated from this extraction of the Amanjiri system. When you read the text, Abdunor coming back in the text and having disciples who were Abdunor's disciples were these Amanjiri children. These are Manjiri students.
So yeah.
So that's the data I extracted. And the text I also read last year is supporting it, what the National has already written in 2015, maybe 2014, the text born on a Tuesday. So now that there are reforms, it's a welcome idea. And thank God the reforms are on. I pray it should yield positive results for us in the North and for Nigeria generally. Thank you,
Abigail. Yeah, so I mean, at this last point, it's about multiplicity of focus as opposed to, some restricted focus. Yeah, Osita, do you have anything to say in response to?
Is there a question for me?
Oh, that was a question for you. I mean, I'm happy to go to the room if you didn't get that. But so
I didn't get the question.
Number 4. Let's take questions in the room, and then we go. Please go on. And then thank you for your patience, audience. We'll soon wrap up.
We use this theological concept of demonology to drive my question. Okay. Now, in theology, we believe that demons possess people, right? Good. I want to drive my question to you particularly. Yes, I don't intend to really pen the integrity of your work. I'm just curious. Okay. If demons possess people, that person doesn't really need to die to exist. They just come and inhabit that person, right? Okay, now my question is this. What role does death play in reincarnation? You talked about children who look like children in the physical, but in other words, they are like adults. Talking about astral travel, people who leave their body. And so how do we relate death? What role does death play? Talking about death now, physical death, spiritual death or technical death, and yes, these types of death, what role do they play in reincarnation?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, the conversation I brought up didn't even have much to do with theology and demonology. You understand? It didn't have much to do with theology and demonology. I situated it within a context of mythology. You understand me? Now, within that context of mythology, and then talking about someone dying and then another person coming back. Now, the issue of someone dying and then another person coming as an incarnate of that person doesn't have anything to do with demons. It is simply a belief of the African society, which has been sustained through mythology. Doesn't have anything to do with demons, doesn't have anything to do with, yes, some religions believe on that, but I'm just trying to establish that this is native to some societies and then it is found in their mythologies.
And the point also, yeah, please go on. Please go on.
Thank you for this exploration and your question. I think my addition is that you asked, what is the role of death? Death plays a role of transition. Death is a process of transition from that border, which he made mention of, from a particular border to another border, is a process. Just like you have in plants. When you plant a seed, it has to die before it comes out again to grow and bring fruit. That's how the role that death plays. In Christendom, in theology, which you mentioned, death is a process. And you can't have life when you have not passed through death. There's life after death. And that life after death is what makes existence, another existence in that mythological conception of the incarnation. Okay, so you have to pass through that process before you begin to exist again. Because we are all human, we are mortals. And so that reincarnation is a process of continuity. And that death is what guarantees that continuity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We will take one more question, and I'll put the last question to Oluchi, before we go. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Sure. My name is Ayo. I'm an independent scholar. I have just a question for the two scholars and people Amajiri. I think your work did not really in any way interrogate Islam, the religious belief system, as to what it relates to the Amajiri belief and all that. It's important to also understand that superstructure. In my own personal understanding of Islam, I'm not a Muslim. I've discovered that you have the Sunnis, the Shiites, and the Salafi schools of Islam. You need to, as scholars, you need to interrogate what are the undertones of these schools of Islamic thoughts on Amajiri. Interpreting even what now transforms the Amajiri from a religious disciple into a soldier of fortune, if you ask me, as a what's that? The scholar Abigail was trying to argue, and then equally the argument of the other scholar that, in fact, they were just mere products of a dislocated economic system. I think it goes deeper than that. It's important to also study and interpret the text, which is the religious basis upon which you are being schooled.
Yeah, thank you. Abigail, Rosita, any comment to that remark? Rosita?
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go on. Abigail, go on.
Yes. Yeah, the last speaker, thank you very much. Actually, you raise a very valid point, which in the course of this, my research, I will look into it, because I don't really understand the question. Are you saying that the Amajiri system is restricted to a particular faction in the Islamic religion?
I can rephrase, I can just summarize again. So he's talking about looking at the text that subtends the practice of Islam itself and saying what framing of the Al-Majri system is discoverable there. You know, that we can't be talking about an Al-Majri system without talking about the text that undergirds, you know, a practice. So that in the course of your research, it would make sense or enrich what you are doing, you know, to look into that aspect as well.
Okay, I got it now. Yeah. I got what he's saying now. I got it now. Because the research I've done so far about the Al-Majri system, what I read so far, let me just say in my own words, it's like this system has been there and it was being funded by the government. But a time came, you know, Nigeria will always happen to every sector, every religion, everything. So the government withdrew from funding this particular kind of education. Now focusing on the formal system of education like the one we are doing now, the university education and the Western knowledge, which somehow will I say the elders, the religious elders, they decide to take it upon themselves to fund this kind of education in the North, but unfortunately, they were not able to be sustaining it. So the children now have to go out there and start fending for themselves. So again, if you look at it, you are still coming back and forth, the government, the failure of the system and everything. So that's it. But I appreciate the advice. I will do further research on this aspect. Thank you.
Thank you. Osita, do you have anything to chip in?
The only thing I would say is my topic is very clear. The Al-Majri schools in northern Nigeria, you know, between education and lost childhood. So I want to remain fine. I agree that it's a system of education. I also try to say that it leads to lost childhood. That's where I want to remain. I'm not in religious studies. I'm not in government policy making. So I want to look at it from that angle. And that is what the panel is all about. I don't want to delve into religious aspects or whatever. I maintain that this system of education, you know, precipitate the loss of childhood. That's where the panel is, and that's where I think I will remain.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. We just have about 3 minutes more. And again, thank you, audience, for your patience. We will walk to the food court shortly. I had a question for you, Oluchi. I mean, I should have one for you. Maybe if Oluchi answers briefly, we will then come to you. Thank you, Oluchi, for the focus on the concept of liminality. I mean, I think for me, it's even clearer the way you articulated it. The question I have is, in the text that you study, how does that manifest? In other words, how does liminality or the liminal being, manifest in the text that is your primary focus in your presentation? And is it possible to say that early marriage, makes the protagonist of that text, the girl child there, a liminal being in that sense? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think from the way I conceive it, the liminality there is that, like I said in my title, there is a truncation of that process. And so early marriage, like you pointed out, comes in as some kind of a factor that truncates that process, in that the child is no longer able. Don't forget, like I said, eventually, when she became of age, she herself went into marriage. So it's not as if she had anything against marriage. However, she did not conceive marriage as something that should come at that particular point in time. In other words, she was still passing through a process which marriage did not allow her or attempted to truncate in her life at that time. So that's, I mean, that's much I can say right now.
Thank you.
That.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. Thank you very much. Finally, Eberichi, I like the way you conceptualize the notion of, children without childhood. And I mean, for me, that signals to the fact that we shouldn't just be looking, to causative factors in the corporeal realm, the physical space, factors as this, as that. We can also, through the stream of mythology, make sense of those human categories, or rather, those who inhabit that space. And that's very important. The question I think that I have is, again, myth is not something that is unuseful. It's useful. It also helps us to explain our world, our phenomena, and human realities, and all that. I think I just want to hear you say, I mean, very briefly, the fact that children without childhood then can be found just about anywhere, as opposed to even the African space, because myth is not, or mythology is not restricted to the African space. As well. Can you just please quickly explain?
Okay, yeah. If I'm to speak on that, it's not necessarily about the issue of myth, but about how a people respond to a particular mythology.
Right.
So their response is being determined by the conditions around them. So that the way someone in North America will respond to a particular myth is not the same way someone in Africa here will respond to a particular myth.
Right.
They are not suffering the same thing. They are not having the same experience. Mm-hmm. So it is their specific experience that determines the way they respond to a particular myth.
I mean, thank you very much. We have a lot to keep going on to, but we're just on the brink of time now. I'm going to very especially thank all our presenters for making out time and sharing with us from the ongoing work. We appreciate it. Thank you very much for that. Thank you to the audience for your attention and for your questions and comments. This brings us to the end of this panel on liminal beings, children without childhood. And as we have said again and again, we're hoping to be able to produce a related volume from this. So I'll be reaching out as we go on. I want to thank you all once again, and do have a very good rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.